Hi, I'm Tyson.
I'm Colin.
I'm Ryan.
And I'm Adam.
We're the Gamesmiths, and we just got done playing Fleet Wars, and now we'd like to talk to you a little bit about our thoughts and impressions. Ryan's going to get us started.
All right. So, Dan, first of all, I think we all had fun tonight, and we all enjoyed the game, and we do have. I'm just trying to think. I really did. I enjoyed kind of the big dice rolling of it. Enjoyed the getting to roll kind of big. You had a large number of dice, but they all were pretty clear as to what they did because they were just a number, or they just said one word pretty quickly. What they did, which was great, and like rolling that and seeing the swings and landing critical hits and stuff like that, and extra explosions were all a lot of fun. And overall, we're all really engaged with the game, and I think me more than a lot of people because I was involved. I think in the majority of the combat, one way or the other. But I think our impressions, we did have fun, but I feel that you have more of a system here and less of a game. I play a lot of role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons and GURPS and Vampire and stuff like that. And I've seen a lot of rule books like that, like this. And that's what this felt more like me. This wasn't like, opening Monopoly and picking up and like, here's how you play Monopoly. This was, here is a system for fighting boats with each other. And I think you've succeeded at creating a system like that. But I don't feel necessarily what we did tonight was a game per se. It felt more like, we all just kind of got in there and it was a battle royal and everything like that. But a game, has objectives and, tries to tell a story and should have goals. And, that just lacked here. So I think while you do have a really, while you have an excellent like system here, putting it in a context, or this is specifically, it's like if you played Axis and Allies or Risk, but it was just on like this big blue map, and the countries didn't mean anything, and we weren't representing nations necessarily.
When you start with
and
all
we
your
weren't.
stuff, you're not trying to build your army.
And you're
Or
not
maybe you need
just-
to represent.
Right. So
everything.
yeah,
maybe you
kinda
need to
start
be
with everything
represented
you
by some
have.
kind of
You
a
float up
country.
Right.
next to each other and then just roll.
Like
Yeah.
why are we fighting? There needs to be a why.
Right,
Yeah.
and we we discussed this beforehand that we would kind of just attack each other and fight, because the reality of the situation is that a much more successful strategy in that scenario is to like turtle as much as you can and pick off ships here and there, and not to just like actively try and attack, but with no points for sinking opponents' ships. No need to go from one end of the board to the other. No requirement to move in a turn if I didn't want to.
No reason to target specific players.
No reason to do anything. As far as from
Other
just
than
a true
try to be
game
the last man
perspective. Right.
standing and hope that everyone else, like that's kind of what I did, is stay back to the end and be very cautious while these guys were trying to go at it. And I was like, it didn't make a good experience for me because I didn't get to play as much.
Exactly.
But for them, they rolled over and over again.
But once you were engaged, it was fun, right? Like
Yeah.
once you actually like got to start rolling dice and shooting
Yeah, the
people and
different
stuff,
guns.
it was
range,
fun.
lots
So yeah,
lots of dice rolling.
so I'm going to kind of wrap up my feelings and then give everybody else a chance to speak and tell you a little bit more about their personal experience with the game. But before I do, I wanted to give just a couple quick thoughts on the rule book. One, like I said, add an intro, add an objective. It really, really helps as someone explaining the rules to the game if the first thing I can do is open it up and say, this is Fleet Wars, a game about naval combat. Your objective is to be the last ship standing in a large battle for the da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Or it's World War II and you represent this side. Put an objective in there, an intro in there that gets people into the game. It's kind of like what you did with the video that you sent us. But that needs to be right in the rule book. You need to just say, this is the game, this is what you're doing, and this is how you win the game. Because if you have that sentence right at the beginning, everything else has so much more context, and it's so much easier to understand the rules if you have that context. And then the other thing is we all felt, and this came up in the gameplay video and we discussed it, but I'll say it here again. We felt that the core shots, I feel that they need to stay in the game because that's a legitimate thing. Ships do have a weak point, and if you can land a bomb or a missile right on that weak point, you can take out that ship. But it was a little too, hitting that spot shouldn't be as a called shot on the core shouldn't be as difficult as a called shot on the bow. You know, the bow's bigger, so we felt like maybe just, and this is just a, throwing this out there, test to see what actually works. Make it a -3 to do a called shot at the core, and make it a -1 to do a called shot anywhere else. Don't, make it a reason to go to a call shot somewhere else, because unless someone is just so ridiculously wounded, it is so hard to get one specific spot beneath a certain value. So I'll go ahead and hand it off to Adam and let him give some of his more specific feelings. But overall, I did have fun, but I don't know, if I had more missions to go on or something like that, it would make me want to come back to this game again. As is, I'm just like, well, that was fun, but I don't really see any replay value to it.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, I agree a lot about with exactly what Ryan was saying. It does feel like a mechanic that you have here, and again, it's interesting in a lot of ways to me. I love big dice rolly games like Zombie Dice, or where you got this huge handful of dice and you get to throw them out and sort through what's there. So really cool there. It was multi-dimensional. One dice led to another. If you roll a 6, there's all these conditions on the dice. If you roll a 6, then you open yourselves up to roll another 6 to keep deepening these critical hits, and that was really cool, even through the rules explanation.
Right.
I'm always seeing what I'm going to grab onto in the rules, and for me, that was one of the things I grabbed onto. So again, I think that's very well developed. I agree. Also, I think there needs to be some balancing in the core shots. It really became a direct path to the right. It was a
no-brainer.
You figured it out very quickly.
The word I'm spacing on it, but we could really
just seemed the
exploit. It was a good exploitation of the game.
Seemed like the best return on your investment.
Right, it was a no-brainer. Everything else wasn't worth it, and so I did more damage with my one weak ship with no torpedoes than I ever did with my whole fleet before I went to core shot. So I think it needs some balancing there, but everywhere else, again, I don't think you have to do much of that with that mechanic, but I do agree you need to build a game around it. I would love to. I love the massive amount of ships. I loved writing all my sheets out at the start. I loved seeing all my stats. I loved having a lot of ships. I personally, I think some of these guys may disagree, but I personally would love to play this game more times and shorter rounds than less times and longer rounds. I'd love more missions. I'd love, hey, you're trying to get from point A to point B and back to point A, and that's my mission, and Colin's trying to sink me while I'm doing that, so I'm using my PBs to block him out while this guy kind of comes through, and I'm just hoping to make it before I sink. That keeps me engaged the whole way, because this one ship just keeps taking all this damage, and I'm like, will he make it? And I'm trying to hold off. So stuff like that, or scenarios, or David versus Goliath, where I'm like Ryan was saying earlier, I've got a few ships, but they're powerful. It's just so you can create all kinds of scenarios, but to me, that keeps me really excited, keeps me engaged, keeps me coming
And if you're not blowing up all the ships, like if you just have to get point A to point B, that's a faster game. Sure, ships can die and get disabled, but you don't necessarily have to chase them all down. So you can do that, get your quicker.
Or there's a VIP on one of your ships that they're trying to come sink. So I send out all my PBs in front to block, and I'm running the whole game with my VIP ship. And if that one ship goes down, game's over. Stuff like that, creating these fun scenarios. Again, that would create a big game around this mechanic, which I think could be really fun. Right. So I wouldn't give up, but I think there's a lot of work to do there. I think I'm just going through my list here. Ryan hit on a number of things. I think there was something in the rules about there being islands. I think even in this scenario, we were all just taking a few more turns to get around the islands and just sat next to each other and dice rolled a bunch. So like I said before, I love big dice rolling games, but most of the ones that I play that I like are fast. Like it's really quick stuff. To me, this was too stretched out to be a big dice rolling game without other mechanics in there to deepen it. If you haven't played X-Wing, I'd play X-Wing. I think there's a lot of good things you could get from that, like a lot of modifiers onto the dice to increase accuracy, to increase power. I'm going to hold off a turn to be more accurate next turn. Just adding strategy, adding dimension to this game.
Yeah, because a lot of your modifiers ended up being negative modifiers. So
Sure.
like, they were the damage to your steer, your radar, your
Right.
fire, etc. Those were negative modifiers. So like those were fun, but
Yeah.
they were also very punishing, and I like to mitigate in the opposite direction.
Mhm.
I think that I love the idea of adding more modifiers
Right.
towards what can I do to make my chances better.
And even like smaller boats being harder to
Mm.
hit. So every smaller boat you have is a -1 to their
Mhm.
attack roll or +1 to your defense roll, and every big ship's easier to hit, but they're stronger because they're big. It's a large object to hit. So just lots of modifiers, lots of just dimension. You've got this really interesting flat thing to me, and I think you got to take that, you got to deepen it, you got to widen it, just put a whole lot more dimension into it. But I wouldn't give up. I think you've got something to build on here. So I'll pass it on.
Okay, I'll take it from here. Yeah, I think like the setup was my biggest question mark when we're starting the game.
Yeah.
Where do you put stuff? There's no explanation of where my boats are supposed to go. Are we randomly drafting? Are we all just going in a certain area? Is our movement like the way I played it is I did my movement based on the ships in my corner. So I did, okay, I'm going 8 over here.
We also just assumed we had a corner too.
Yeah.
Right.
Like,
Yeah,
we
we
don't
don't
know
have
if
any
we did
idea.
that right.
So we don't know if we're supposed to like, okay,
Turn
so
by turn.
so I'm
Yeah.
going here, and then
stand
Adam
up.
wants to go right next to my guy, so he
Right.
knows that he's going to
Everybody
be able
places
to
one at a
yeah
time or
yeah
something,
if we can try to one up each other and have a strategic situation on the board, or you can go in the direction of the scenarios where you're going through the Strait of Gibraltar. You have all these U-boats, or you have something that's trying to take down the Americans that are trying to land here in France, or something.
Right.
So that's something. I just need an objective. I need to know why I'm doing it. And I think if you're going to go that way, I'd say place all your patrol boats first, then your destroyers, and your frigates, battleships, something like that.
Some sort of
Um,
constraints.
And I really want to see a limit to the amount of torpedoes that can be fired in a turn.
I think everything
That was, I mean, just from an observer,
torpedo
from somebody that
machine
wasn't
gun.
involved in it, and because my frigates were just so far
Far
away
away,
from
yeah.
it, like I just placed them poorly. I just didn't get to do it, but I got to watch a lot of that happen, and it was just like loading 24, like keeping. As you saw, we
Yeah, we
kept-
get the
kept
dial
track
out.
of how many times we're going on a spin down dice, which that's a little too much. And then the more you shoot, the less enjoyment you get per time, because you're like,
Yeah.
I've already done this. I've just done this, and it gets
True.
redundant.
I did make a
and
note. I got
monotonous.
bored in the actually in
In
my
the-
And
it was my turn.
It
I was the
extends your
attacker.
game. Like you're going for a 2-hour game, and we played for nearly 3 hours, and that most of it that was because like, okay, all right, I got that through. Okay, now let's see. I got a crit, so let's grab all these other dice, and it turns from 24 rolls into 50.
Right.
So
And I would argue we weren't even playing optimally. Like
Right.
against,
Yeah.
like if you were playing against 4, Fleet Wars masters, like I think the game would be even longer because it would be this cat and mouse game without people risking too much because one core shot and you're done. You
Yeah.
know? And yeah, there was definitely, we weren't necessarily, we were just kind of fighting each other. We weren't necessarily optimizing our play for being the survival amongst 4 opponents.
And then I didn't like the core shots, and I think I've thought about it. The reason I didn't like it is because the Type 3 shots are too powerful, and I would say even the Type 2. I would say you should have a D6, a D8, and a D10. And a Type 1 is a D6, Type 2 is a D8, and a Type 3 is a D10. So
Which reminds me, yes, if you're going to abbreviate
Yeah.
dice, six-sided dice is abbreviated usually D6, not SSD. That's just a thing. Sorry, you just reminded me of that.
So 8-sided dice for Type 2 and 3, because I feel like your chances of getting sunk immediately if you get a core shot against you and a 3 are just, you're going to hit it. Like, especially getting Adam's battleship getting sunk immediately, and mine just in one hit. It was like, that's devastating.
It's
your
very
best ship in
deflating.
your fleet just gets sunk, and you're like, but wait a minute. Like,
But I'm going to disagree with that only because I think that there is strategy to that. It means it puts priority on your battleships to make sure that you are protecting them. And this goes back to what kind of Ryan was saying, is that you need context to be able to do that. So, like, if it helps to contextualize that your battleship is going to be powerful, so you want to wait to bring it into potential line of fire. So you have to be very safe, because if you leave that vulnerable to another battleship, it could get annihilated.
Yeah,
A battleship
but
anywhere on that
okay.
map with its
in
one
my
set of
scenario,
units
you
could
hit me
any
from
battleship.
the furthest away period that you could have, and somehow you were able to critically zone in and hit that. I just don't think that would.
I can see the difficulty. Yeah,
The difficulty
the
level
difficulty
needs
just
to be
needs to
much
be tweaked.
harder.
I definitely agree with you that it should be like, maybe it should start at -1 and then increase with every range you get to, and then if
Right, your meter stick already
But still,
does that.
the
So if
amount
you're
of
doing it a
damage
Type
that
3
does
gun,
is,
or I'd even, you know what I would even
it's too
consider
much.
doing
3
it.
dice, 3d6 is too much. You can do a maximum of 18 damage, and your core is only a 7.
But you could
so
use
the
3D
chances that you're going to hit something and kill it immediately with a battleship
So
hit
I
is
agree
just
with
going
you,
to
but
happen.
here's how you can fix that easily. You take your meter stick. You can use 3d6 if it's in the first range, in the first stick range, right? And the further it gets, you lose a dice.
That
right?
sounds better
because
to me.
the further you get, the harder it's going to
Yeah,
get to hit.
I like
something.
that better.
So if you're doing the longest
Yeah.
shot, you're only going to get one die
Yeah.
in there to be able to do that amount of damage, because it's going to be harder. So
Yeah, and velocity and all that.
right.
Okay. And then I felt like because of the speed of how much ships were dying before turns were even over, before it would even get to me, there would be half of their stuff would already be dead, and I'd be like, well, you're rolling for 6 turns on smoke or 6 turns on not being able to fire, but it just seemed irrelevant when your stuff's just
They were
getting
gonna be
destroyed
done,
before that next turn even comes around. So I don't know. It seemed a little overkill if the amount of damage is going to be so heavy. Yeah, and that just goes to turns lasting a little too long. Yeah, but I think if you make little changes and give us a little direction, it could be a much more fun game. I really, really love Axis and Allies. Specifically, the closest thing I can think to this game is Axis and Allies Pacific version. I might pick that up if you haven't played it, because it's mostly about these naval battles. It's U.S. versus Japan, and the ally of the U.S., of course, is the U.K., going through India and Australia. So that can give you some ideas on how all these, because most of these ships are in the game. There's some transports and some other things, but it could be interesting. Also, another thing to include would be a resupply ship for torpedoes, because one thing is when our patrol boats ran out, it's like that they shot their 2 and then that was it for the game. So it made them much more expendable.
Yeah.
It would be cool to be able to refuel.
Yeah.
I'd also consider making maybe. I found the steering a little confusing. I've made notes in here, and you can look at that. But I would actually just consider maybe taking one of the sections off the crit die, like your black crit die, secondary explosion, or equipment failure. I'd actually take equipment failure off, since it's kind of
Another
redundant.
die.
Yeah,
like,
it is.
and instead of equipment failure, just make that core shot, and then your damage hits the core. So on a secondary crit, you could hit a core shot
Yeah.
just by the roll of the
Sure.
dice, and then all of that damage that you happen to do just gets applied to the
I
core.
like that.
It could be another way to do core shots. Tyson, do you want to go ahead and share your feelings?
Yeah. So I mean, a lot of my thoughts have been covered by these guys, and I think their feedback is very valuable and valid. And I think that one thing that I wanted to hone in on about something that I really enjoy was something that Adam touched in a little bit on. My favorite part of this entire experience was that first part of it, putting that board out, looking at these little pieces, my fleet, being able to see, oh, I've got a battleship, I've got some destroyers, I've got some frigates and some patrol boats and all of this stuff, and that was really exciting to me. And then learning what their stats were and thinking like, oh, that's great. I can see how having my battleship at the back and protected by these patrol boats is going to be really great. Making sure that the battleship is protected and things like that. So that first instance, and I've drawn this experience or this little graph on my notes of my experience where at the first part I was really excited and happy and really enjoying everything, and then as play started to go on, I started to level out into my baseline, and it was just like, okay, we're playing. And then there were a couple times like as I saw Ryan and then Adam engage in conflict, it peaked a little bit, and then it went down a little bit more, and then until I saw, oh, Adam's about to die, it peaks a little bit more, and then it goes down. But it never ever came back to that initial excitement and happiness and joy that I felt in that setup. I love the setup, and I love that about this system. And I do agree with a lot of what's been said, specifically about providing narrative or means for the game to grow. Because if you're peaking at the very start of your game, then you're having a lot of problems. I think Ryan talked about it a little bit in that a narrative or a game should be like any other form of medium of storytelling, whether that's a movie, whether that's a game, etc. You should have a clear beginning, middle, and end. And those should be engaging throughout. There can be little droops and stuff in between, but it's got to have that experience where, well, now we're just grinding, and that's okay because I know that once I get to I know that I'm getting to the climax. I know that I'm getting to the point that it all comes together and all of my efforts pay off. But when you're just moving from point A to point B, and the climax is there's going to be a conflict here, and that conflict is going to be determined by a lot of things that I'm not going to be able to modify all that much, then there's some... don't get me wrong, throwing the tons of dice was really fun. I loved the exploding dice factor, that if I get a 6, then I get another 6, like that kind of compounding feeling was really exciting. There's a lot of really cool moments in the game. My concern, however, is that those are few and far between, and your gaps of kind of stagnation are too long compared to the exciting points. And part of that, I believe, is because we played a 4-player game. I think if I had been playing a 2-player game of this, my objective would be very clear in that if I'm playing against Ryan, I'm going against Ryan. But Adam having the very first turn, he has to make this decision. Do I go to Ryan? Do I go to Colin? Or do I make a long trek around the middle and then expose myself to everybody else and try and get to Tyson? It just doesn't have that clear kind of, what am I doing with this? And so in a 4-player game, it's this free-for-all kind of confusing epic that is not as epic as it should be because there's no reason to be doing it. And so I think there was a distinct disadvantage for Adam going first.
I agree.
Yeah, not understanding the game even.
Exactly.
Like, I would have either full on rushed or even
having one or two ships was a bit.
Well, and I think the strategy is to attack the 4th player. Like everybody go for the 4th player, so the 4th player actually doesn't have a chance to rebut. And I think that's what everyone should have done, is gone after me. And
but exactly that, in a 4-player game, the system is designed to have the first player having the most disadvantage, and there's no way to mitigate that disadvantage really, because they get to say, well, I can just pass my turn essentially, or I can wait or I can pick a fight with somebody. And if I pick a fight with somebody, that leaves my back open to the other somebody.
Right.
And so there's some problems there with that. So I think the 4-player mode needs some tweaking if you want to keep it. I would prefer to play this game at a 2-player mode. And if
and with two maps,
or 2 teams,
and there's
that
two,
was my next.
there's 2
that
maps
was my
that we
next
just
point.
use one of. That would be crazy.
I
to
would
have
do
4.
teams, and your teams you get a specific. You make these ships a certain amount of points. So you make each ship or airplane or whatever you're playing with a certain amount of points, and teammate A gets X amount of points to spend on their fleet, and they have to coordinate with their partner to be able to make sure that, you know, I'm gonna get a bunch of planes, so I need you to get some carriers so that we can get those deployed, and I'm gonna go all out on that. You also
That's
probably
very
need
Axis
some,
and Allies.
yeah.
Like,
So you need to have this
currency.
collaboration in a 4-player game of a team. If you want a free for all, I still think that there's a lot that needs to be done, even like maybe making a point system, because the player elimination, especially in this long of a game,
could mean somebody sitting out for an hour.
And that may be okay if that's the game is, this is what we're playing. Once you're dead, you can go home, kind of a thing. But to me, player elimination has some stuff that I don't personally like. So I would consider finding a way to make it so that, like Adam was saying,
well, one
have
person can
more
just
players.
win. If you just have a goal and
Outright
one person
win.
can just win. You know, whoever sinks X boat first wins, and so whoever gets the kill shot wins, and then the
someone
game's
gets
just
away,
over.
they
Or
win,
like there's just a definitive end point at the game.
Exactly.
So
which is where the objectives come in, and I think that for me that's one of my biggest takeaways, is that I would definitely echo what Ryan said about this is a system. And in fact, there's a lot of good things about this system, and I think that you can take this system and improve upon it. It's not a perfect system yet, but it can be improved upon, and that wouldn't take very much. The big struggle you're going to have is contextualizing it, like Colin said, and making sure that it has something to play in, because otherwise you create... Like, we could have made some narratives out of this, and we could have made some objectives.
Well, that's what
it's a sandbox.
That's what I said. I play a lot of D&D. This looks to me like a D&D core rule book, and then I would either write my own adventure, or I'd go get another book that has like, here are your scenarios. Like that. That's kind of what I would recommend. But I think ultimately we all kind of agree. You've got a lot of fun things to do here, but not a lot of reasons why to do them. So both in keeping your players engaged and keeping your players and wanting to come back, offer some kind of story and scenario and reasons to do that. Maybe do a little balance to the rules to make it a little bit more competitive and allow for more strategies, and then consider reducing the number of players, or giving it a more definitive end game, so we're not looking at a bunch of people eliminating and watching. We had a good time though, and thank you for sending us your game, and keep up the good work.